Nipola. It cannot be life. Of the vibrations they come. Over a force they leap and twirl. Many rise, many pray. No, no, God, we're okay. Leave the creatures of earth at their own level. They will rise to only the vibrations of love when time ends. I'm so honored to introduce you to my dear friend, Vanessa Lynn. She has an important story to tell. It is a story about facing unimaginable pain, loving unconditionally, the power of words, and life after death. It is her journey, and it is her daughter, Elle's journey. In Vanessa's just published book, With Elle, Ravens and Rainbows, she tells this story. It is a must read. Vanessa and I grew up in the same town, and while our paths have crossed a few times over the years, it was our mutual friend Amy that truly brought us together in 2018. I remember Amy insisting that we meet, and it wasn't until Amy's daughter's bat mitzvah that we really met. It was the first time you'd been out in public since Elle's passing, Vanessa. And I remember meeting you right before the service began. And it was like seeing a long lost family member. I remember sitting with you during the service and just hugging you. And as people came over to you after the service was over, I just held your hand. I know that Elle made that happen.
Today we'll learn more about why this story needed to be told. We believe you'll walk away with a new appreciation for life and life after death. Vanessa, welcome. We're so glad that you're here with us today. You are such a force, and I know that everyone who listens to this and then reads the book will know that. We start with you first. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your career and your life as a mom.
So first of all, thank you both. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this, for reading the book, for being so instrumental really in getting it across the finish line. It's not a small task, and I really, really, truly appreciate it. So, I never set out to be a writer or an author. That was not really ever part of my plan. It was clearly part of Elle's plan, and she's the one who runs the show, so I do what she tells me to do. But in my day job, I'm a consultant. I'm an organizational psychologist by trade, so I do executive development and executive team development and things of that nature, and kind of living this corporate life, and then I come home and I'm a mom through and through.
Will you talk about your background?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a psychologist, did my undergrad in psychology and then did a master's in clinical psychology. I shifted and then finished the rest of my graduate work on the organizational side, kind of applying so much of what I had learned about human nature and what makes people who they are and, what makes them do what they do, but applying that in a business setting. So I come at this with a psychological background, which now I can say in retrospect, I'm sure wasn't an accident, but it felt coincidental at the time.
Yeah, I have to agree. Not an accident at all. And that's why I do think it's important for people to know that.
Long before Elle got sick, really since birth, one of the things that kind of always drove me as a mom was understanding who your children are and meeting them where they're at. As I look back now and as we think about this story and I think about where my relationship is with Elle now and with my younger daughter who's living, that continues to drive me.
Let's talk about your two daughters.
So they're 20 months apart to the day. They're very, very different personalities, which was just fascinating. And they were from birth, which, kind of leads into this notion that I have a much greater understanding of now, of just your soul and what you come here to do. So Elle from birth was always edgy and witty and sarcastic and brutally honest and super sensitive to her surroundings and her environment. So she's someone, and I write about this in the book, who just kind of had this knowing. She could, even as a baby, 6 months, 9 months, pre-verbal, she would kind of look at someone and you could see this look in her eyes and she would then immediately let you know if that was someone who she was comfortable with or not. Elle, we would joke, was always an old soul. She had moments of childhood innocence, but they were moments. Most of the time you could see this just really deep knowledge and understanding in her eyes. And then her little sister is just this cuddly, lovey, unicorn and sprinkles, girly girl. She just idolized her sister, but very, very different personalities growing up. This kind of edgy, deep child, and then this kind of innocent, wide-eyed soul. What's interesting, and I actually don't talk about this in the book, but what's interesting now as my younger daughter is now older than Elle was when she passed. And I see so much of Elle in her. That maybe that's the second book. I don't know. It's as if my younger daughter embodies both of them. It's interesting. It's like this three-legged stool, and now in the after phase, this kind of merging into one unit almost.
What made you write the book? What made you actually sit down and tell the story?
So during Elle's life, she was always a writer. There was no mystery around that. And she would often talk about her desire to get published. In the days prior to her passing, she really was very adamant about, like, I have this compilation of works and I want to get it published. So it was always her plan to get her work published. And it was always my plan to help her do that. After she died, I spent several months just reading everything that she wrote over and over and printing it and, holding the paper and reading it. And I just sat with it for a while. And then one day, probably almost a year and a half ago now, I was on an airplane and I opened my computer and I just started writing. I mean, it was clearly Elle guiding me. And I just started writing, and I spent about 3 or 4 months, every waking moment that I wasn't busy being a mom or working, just writing. And so it's a very long answer to your question. I did not set out to do this, but it clearly was what Elle needed me to do, both for her and for me.
Well, and today we're specifically celebrating Elle's life because it's the anniversary of her death.
Yeah.
And the official launch of the book that you both wrote. And, today we're going to talk about the life and legacy of Elle, because there was so much that she taught you during her time on earth and continues to teach you after her death. And there's so much that she wanted the world to know. And she left us all with her words and her wisdom. And while she's not physically here with us today, we know that she's here with spirit, because I can hear her and I know you can feel her. And, just going back to talking about when she was young, what was different about Elle, as we were saying, that she felt those vibes, right? You had this unspoken language. And then I know you've told me stories, I know it's in the book, about how she was really seeing energy.
Yeah. I don't know exactly what it was. I mean, when she was a newborn baby, and everyone's coming over and visiting, how it is when you have a newborn baby and everyone wants to hold her and this and that. And she just would not have it. Even as a little itty bitty, she would not have it. And I remember people holding her and just watching her face, kind of turn into this grimace and counting to 10 and trying to be the good new mom and, letting all these people hold her. And at some point just being like, I have to take her back.
Was that with everyone, Vanessa, or was it just certain people?
It's a really good question. Definitely certain people. I would say most people, not everyone. And what was so interesting, Karen, is there were certain people that she would be drawn to. So she just gave me these signs from a really, really early age around kind of what she was comfortable with and what she wasn't comfortable with. She was always very sensitive and very tuned in, interestingly, to her body and her body clock. Big holiday dinners, things like that, where, you're a little bit off schedule and people would tend to say, oh, it's fine. They're kids and they're resilient and all the things that people would say. She was resilient in many, many ways, but in that way, she really wasn't. Like, I had to honor what she needed. And so, different family functions or large functions, even if they weren't family, of, all the kids are going to go in the basement and play while the adults do, There was just no way. I mean, she would look at me and there was no way that would happen.
Don't you feel like people didn't totally understand?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah,
for sure. I mean, I think people thought I was probably this horribly overprotective helicopter mom. I mean, I know some of the things that people said, I can only imagine what was said, kind of behind the scenes, but Elle made it very clear to me what she needed. And my feeling as a mom has always been what my kids need comes before what truly any extended group of friends or family thinks is socially acceptable.
Yeah. And you just knew. I mean, that's the
thing that set you up, I think, for your relationship going forward so well.
I know that Elle trusted that even if I couldn't fully know what her experience was, because I don't know that you can ever fully know what somebody else's experience is, but she trusted that I would honor it.
She really, exactly why she knew you could write this book for her.
Yes. Yes. And then can you just talk also about what she was talking to you about deceased loved ones that she was seeing?
She was little. So it was interesting. Elle, as you know from reading the book, extraordinarily gifted intellectually, but actually slow to speak in full sentences. Interestingly, she had, her code language, as many babies do. And, I could understand certain words, but she was probably 2 before she started talking in a way that other people could understand. But be that as it may, as soon as she described her great-grandmother in exceptional detail, from what she looked like and how she dressed to her personality to things that she would say to, just extraordinary detail. And she had never seen a photograph. There's no photographs of her in my home or in her grandparents' home, she had passed many, many decades prior to Elle's birth. So, it was just not something that was part of conversation. And she just described her completely. And I talk about in the book kind of the first time that happened, but they maintained a relationship for years.
What was your reaction?
It was really awe and inspiration that here this child who I knew was a prophet in some ways, right? From a very early age, you just knew she was different. And then for her to give words to what she had been experiencing, and it made sense. There were moments. So she had, maintained this very close relationship with her great-grandmother, but it was clear that she saw spirits. And so moments where, she would look off into the distance and you could see this look on her face, and I'd be thinking, what is going on? All of a sudden, all of that started to make sense to me.
Well, and she was teaching you life after death at that early age.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, she was.
I love the word that you use, prophet, because that was the word that I was reaching for when I was reading the book. Because when I read that first poem that she wrote, the one that she got honorable mention, I think, for.
Which is I'm looking at it in my office right now. I'm looking at the plaque that shows her honorable mention.
Yes.
What went through my mind was like how Rumi would write. Like there was just that emotional feeling that was in her words and in her poetry from the very, very, very beginning. Can you talk a little bit about her poetry? Because this is such an integral part of the book.
Oh my gosh. So she always wrote, obviously, as you can tell, the early poems that you see in the book were written when she was 8 years old. She was just always a writer, always a reader. I've got some of her books behind me that she wrote when she was, 6, 7 years old. That initial poem that won honorable mention, at the time when she wrote it, I remember thinking this is unbelievable. And, people would read it and they're like, I have to look up some of the words, I'm not even sure I understand it all. But I remember, because she had been so vocal about, her spiritual connections at that point, I remember thinking that this was clearly a spiritual poem, but not really fully understanding the meaning of it until I went back and read it after she died. Right. And then all of the sudden, the prophecy of it became, just abundantly clear.
One of the things too that's so striking when you talk about her poetry as a young child, that people didn't even believe she wrote it.
I know. That's why I got.
Can you just
honorable mention?
Talk about that? Can you talk about that really for the story?
Yeah. Thank you for raising it. So she wrote this poem and submitted it to, a poetry contest. And they had, like a presentation where, the people who had written poems and their families came. And the panel of judges came up to me afterwards and they said, are you sure that she wrote that poem? And I said, of course. Why do you ask? And they said, well, the reason we gave it honorable mention is we were really torn because it was so exceptional that we had to recognize it in some way. And yet we thought there's no possible way an 8-year-old wrote this. And so we couldn't give it first place because we thought perhaps there was some sort of cheating involved. And I looked at the judge and I said, I can assure you, she wrote this poem. I could live my entire life and I would never be able to put those words on paper. And as she got older, in some of the poems that she wrote before she was sick that she did share with me, at the time, you could see a depth to her, a darkness in some way, right? In that, she was never a happy-go-lucky. I would never describe Elle as this happy-go-lucky, carefree. She was never carefree. And then, of course, her later poems, describe, as I knew they would, when she was living and she would say, you can't read them now. I honored that one because I honored her desire for privacy, but also because I knew she was right. I knew she was protecting me, and that as much as I was living with her and living with the pain and seeing it every day, she knew that I knew the power of her words. And I think there's something about seeing it in writing and reading her own description of it that is, even though I lived it, I saw it, reading her own words is even deeper than that. And she knew that.
I know. And the depth of that poetry really helped you understand exactly what she was going through. I was just blown away how even in the midst of such pain and suffering, she was able to find such amazing words to explain. Sorry. We went on her journey with her now that we have this book, right? Because between you're telling the story and her sharing the poetry, it's like you could feel every aspect of the journey along the way.
In addition to foreshadowing, actually, like almost exactly what ended up happening, she was almost tortured with knowing that she was going to have to go through that. She knew she was going to have to endure pain. I mean, I think one of the things that on our seeking journey we are finding is that most people don't end up enduring the pain. Do you know what I mean? The actual physical pain in our human bodies. I think one of the things that we've found talking to different healers and teachers is that most people, when they die, they leave their body before they feel the pain. Right. And I so wish I could understand why she had to go through the pain. There's you having to go through the pain of watching her. And then she had to actually physically endure such pain.
I wrestle with that every day. Like, why did she have to go through such excruciating, extraordinary pain for such a long time? Like, that's the piece that
chills thinking about it.
People have said to me, and there's no doubt it's true, right? There can't be anything harder than losing a child. And that's a true statement. But I will tell you, watching your child suffer in pain and knowing that there's nothing you can do comes really close.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. When you talk about, her poetry and her depth, because clearly she was this soul and prophet, but she was also really funny. She had this dark humor, and it makes me think about so many successful, or whatever we deem successful, comedians, but she did go on to do comedy.
Yeah, so she was part of, before she got sick, she auditioned for a youth ensemble group at Second City. So she was 11 when she started there, turning 12. And they had this youth ensemble, and you have to audition for it. And they had like 1 or 2 open spots, and it was for ages 11 through 17 or something like that. And she got one of the open spots. She loved it. I mean, it was like this young Saturday Night Live kind of, and she wrote for them and performed for them. And in fact, there's a video recording of her last performance, which was 2 or 3 days before her illness began. And it's a 1-minute clip. And we actually played it at her memorial service so that people could really see just the whole of who she was and who she is, and her humor and her understanding of very adult things and her ability to make it funny.
Do you wish that you could grow a manly beard, or that you could rock that snazzy bikini top? Well, now you can, with all new and improved puberty. With puberty, you can watch your body and mind change before your very eyes, both physically and mentally. And now, a real customer testimony. Before puberty, I used to look like this, but after...
I look like this!
See? Real, actual results. And puberty is natural and safe. Some common side effects may include acne, oily skin, awkward talks with your parents, the purchasing of embarrassing products, some awkward crushes, and in the most extreme cases, the "it's not a phase, Mom" phase. Puberty. Get yours today at any local middle school.
I love that. Let's talk about her sexuality. She came out to you at a really young age. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so she was 10 when she came out. We were sitting on her bed talking about I don't know what, and just out of nowhere, she's like, what would you say if I liked girls? And I said, I'd say great, like I want you to have loving, happy, healthy relationships, period. And in her own characteristically L way, she's like, this isn't an experimentation. I'm not trying to find myself. She's like, I'm telling you I'm gay. And it was so funny because it didn't surprise me. And yet again, I couldn't tell you why, because she was such a unique person. And I write about this in the book. It was like being straight would have been too pedestrian for her. You know? But I think the point is, she knew who she was from a very, very young age. She was unapologetic about it, unwavering about it.
No, Vanessa, I have to say, listening to you tell the story, what I'm hearing from Elle right this moment is, again, the pride in you of always meeting her where she was, of her being able to tell you whatever it was and knowing that you would always be there to support her. And I think the thing that is so important in this book, as much as this is her story, it's a mother story as well.
Thank you.
The story that you're telling before reminds me, I think there's always that moment before life changes that we remember. We were talking about the video. What changed?
What happened right when a few days after that performance, she was 12 years old. Mm-hmm. What was it?
So everything changed, obviously. That performance was on a Saturday. She had gone to school on Monday and she was in 6th grade. And she came home and, we were just talking, hanging out. And almost as an afterthought, she said, oh, by the way, I kind of twisted my ankle at recess. No big deal. Doesn't hurt, just FYI. And this is in the book. It's kind of a small point, but she twisted her ankles all the time, which we later learned had to do with her EDS. She said it in passing. It was a really casual, I was at recess and there was this ledge and I kind of jumped off the ledge and I landed funny and twisted my ankle. And I looked at it and it wasn't swollen. It wasn't, she had full range of motion. It was fine. She's like, it's totally fine. I just wanted to let you know. It was kind of a non-issue. That was Monday evening. Tuesday morning at 5 a.m., she called me. She couldn't walk. She yelled from her room for me. And she said, something is wrong. She said, my whole left leg feels like it's on fire. And, I remember looking at her leg and there was no swelling. There was, she could move, but it felt like it was on fire and it was discolored. It was like a purple, it was like there was clearly something wrong. And so fortunately, she was light enough that I could carry her. I carried her downstairs and into the car and into the ER. And they examined her and they basically said, they took an x-ray, everything was fine. They're like, we don't know what's wrong. Here's a pair of crutches, call an orthopedic. There was nothing that they could see that was physically wrong. There was no torn ligaments. There was nothing. And so 2 days later, we got her in to see this orthopedic and the orthopedic said, I can tell you exactly what this is, but I can't treat it. And the orthopedic is the one who diagnosed it and said, this is what it is. I can tell you that without a doubt. I'm not the one to treat it.
What was the diagnosis that he gave?
Complex regional pain syndrome. The initial CRPS is how it shows up. It's a neurological condition. Nobody quite knows why, but for whatever reason, it's often triggered by a minor injury, like a twisted ankle. One of her doctors had a patient who had it triggered in her hand because she slept in a scrunchie, a ponytail holder on her wrist, and it was a little too tight, and she woke up the next morning and had it in her hand. So minor injury to the body that for whatever reason causes the brain to think that there's a major injury. And so the brain starts sending pain signals to that part of your body as if there's major injury, even though there's not. And it gets caught in this loop. And nobody knows why, but it gets caught in this loop and it just keeps sending pain signals nonstop. And so your body acts like there's catastrophic injury.
Well, and I think what struck me too was the level of pain.
And I think this is the piece, honestly, that is hardest for everyone to get their head around, really myself included, because you think about the worst possible pain you could be in, right? And then you think about it being worse than that. So there's this scale called the McGill pain scale, and it kind of rates, right, different levels, scale of 0 to 50 different levels of pain. And so it's, back pain, a sprained ankle, a fracture, pain from cancer, pain from childbirth, pain from amputation without anesthesia. And CRPS is at the top of the list. I say this without exaggeration. It's known as the most painful condition to humankind, period. The most painful thing that someone can experience. And so the pain, the particular kind of pain from CRPS is a burning pain. And so it creates the sensation that you're being burned alive. I mean, that is the only way to describe it. It creates the sensation you're being burned alive.
Can we just talk about what a typical case of CRPS is and what Elle's case was?
Yeah, so there's typical for adults and typical for children. And she was 12 at the time, so she was a child. And what her doctors told us was typically in children, it resolves itself with physical therapy. And typically within children, it resolves itself within a couple of months with intensive physical therapy. If you've had it, once you hit the 2-year mark, the odds of it going into remission reduce significantly. The degree of kind of dysfunctionality and disability that it causes can vary. It's always painful, but people can have days where they can function and do things. Elle had no days. And I was talking to one of her specialists that we were working with, and I said, actually, it was Elle who asked him the question, not me. Level with me, right? Enough of the platitudes. Am I typical? Like, is this what you normally see? And he said, I've never seen anything like this. So you take what is known as the most painful condition to humankind as a starting point. And then you realize that Elle had the most severe, intractable case that the specialist, who's one of half a dozen people in the country who are specialists in this, has ever seen.
And let's talk about what the treatment is. And because I don't think people can understand that there isn't pain medication that works on this. What were the different types of treatments that you tried? So that obviously with the goal of eliminating it altogether, but at least dulling the pain.
So we tried everything. The first thing they do is they try drugs for nerve pain, gabapentin, Lyrica, no relief. Then physical therapy is, kind of an approved treatment, which again in children usually leads to resolution or remission. In Elle's case, it made it worse. There are spinal cord injections. We did probably 6 of those. Those didn't work. We did an inpatient epidural. Not only did that not work, but the pain broke through the epidural, which was shocking. So you imagine the power of this neurological pain. Then we did a series of ketamine infusions. Ketamine is becoming a little bit more mainstream. Even in these couple of years, you'll see commercials about it as an approved treatment for depression and things of that nature. It's an anesthesia. On the street, it's known as Special K. It's a date rape drug. So, it's used in all kinds of interesting ways. But they do these infusions. They basically knock you out. You do like a 3-day chunk, and they knock you out and they give you increasingly higher doses of ketamine. And the idea is that it somehow interrupts memory to no avail. She had spinal cord stimulators in place surgically. There was just nothing. And the pain medication that you mentioned, not only do they not work, they actually can over time make the pain worse.
Talking about going back to the ketamine, because I know I was so struck with also what would come out of those sessions, even though it wasn't dulling the pain. It seemed to me that her soul was talking, because there's something about it being almost like a truth serum of some sort. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, the ketamine was fascinating. It was terrifying and fascinating at the same time. Terrifying to see your child. So when they give you ketamine, they couple it with propofol because it causes intense hallucinations. So they couple it with propofol so that you're not conscious of that and you're not experiencing it, because it can be frightening. But when you come out of it and when she's waking up, to see someone in that kind of altered state is frightening initially. And then, I kind of got used to it, but the first time was scary. What was so interesting about the ketamine is it really was a truth serum for her. And one of the things ketamine does, and she and I both learned this over time, is it creates a very dissociative kind of out of body experience. To your point, Robyn, it was like her soul could step out of her body for a period of time. And she would wake up from these ketamine infusions, and she had her ketamine voice, which was like this innocent little girl voice, but with her edginess and wit and humor. And it was just remarkable. She would talk about her fears. She would talk about how guilty she felt of being a burden to me. She would talk about her fear of being abandoned, that would I be able to care for her, because she knew what a toll it was taking. After her first ketamine session, and I show the transcript of this in the book, she really talked about being on a different planet, like being on this purple planet, and how everyone here on Earth was alien to her because her home was somewhere else at the time. And she had asked me to record it, because she was, she wanted to document everything for science. So she's like, record it. I want to know what this is. And at the time I knew ketamine was a hallucinogen. And so I just kind of assumed she was dreaming of this purple planet. But when I went back and listened, there's so many things that I went back to and read or listened to after she passed. And to hear her speaking these words of wanting to go home, and now I have the chills again. And that's really what stood out in that transcript, was her talking about how this isn't her home. And I'm her mom, but this isn't her home. That like sums it up. I'm her mom, but this isn't her home.
It really stuck with me. That part stuck. It felt so real, even though I think to most people talking about being on another planet, but that felt so honest. It really did, that she wasn't home. And it like also, when you think back to that other poetry she wrote, there's an uncomfortable feeling, not just because she's enduring the most painful thing you can ever endure, but there's just this discomfort with being on this planet. This isn't her place, but you're her person.
Yeah. And that was what, as I went back and listened to it, and as I think about it now, what stands out so much, it's exactly that. This isn't her place, but I'm her person.
How did you cope, Vanessa, with getting through this? Because I think there was only one point in the book that at least stood out for me where you broke down. What kind of tools did you have to get through this? So if there's other mothers out there that are listening to your story who are also suffering.
Oh, it's a great question. I wish I could say I was consciously, kind of turning to things. But as I look back, I walk, and I've always said for years, that's my therapy. And I would walk a lot, certainly after she passed, but during her illness as well, any moment I could. And I think what it represents, if I were to kind of extrapolate out and try and give advice to others, I think whether it's walking or whatever it is, it's finding something that puts you in kind of a meditative state. And it's interesting. I had not been, I'm still not as spiritual as I am. I'm not a big meditator, which is not to knock meditation, but walking for me puts me in that state. And so I think my advice to people would be, find that for yourself, whether it's walking, whether it's meditating, whether it's writing music, whether it's singing, whether it's swimming, whatever it is, and make time for that. Because I've said so many times, and I mean it, that saved my life. And now, in the after, that's Elle's with me always, but we walk together every day. So I think that would be one thing. I think the other thing is having enough self-awareness to know what you need and to be unapologetic in asking for that. And what I mean by that is, I'm a pretty private, introverted person. I know that about myself, and I'm glad that I know that about myself. And during her illness, there were so many well-meaning, well-intentioned people who wanted to come by and bring us a pizza, or who wanted to talk, or who wanted to do whatever they wanted to do. And I knew myself well enough to know that that's not what I needed. It's what they could provide, and I totally understand it and appreciate it, but it's not what I needed.
And just talking about, for those who haven't read the book yet, but they're listening to this, it started with one leg, right? And then can you just explain the progression? And then what are the other types of illnesses that really came in addition to the CRPS that you kind of had precursors but would never have known?
So CRPS is known to spread. So it began in her left leg below the knee. Within a couple of days, it had spread up to her, all the way up her thigh, like to her hip in her left leg. And then about 3 months in, it spread to her right leg. Further down the line, in her final surgery, which was December of 2017, that surgery caused it to spread up her back. And that's what kept her confined to bed, because she could no longer sit. So the CRPS itself spreads. In addition, what we learned is that she had Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is abbreviated as EDS, which is a connective tissue disorder where the tissue connecting your joints, your ligaments is very weak. And so it creates kind of a lot of hyperextension, double jointedness. What I learned is it can create a tremendous amount of joint pain. It can cause your joints to dislocate. And it also, from a skin standpoint, can cause very slow wound healing. So in retrospect, I mentioned earlier, she would twist her ankle all the time. What we learned as her CRPS progressed, and we don't know why, but those two things, there's a high comorbidity rate. Researchers don't quite know why, but they often coexist. And so while she was being burned alive, she was also having this incredible joint pain. It was literally like her body was just kind of wobbling and falling apart. And it's also what created this slow wound healing. So incisions after she would have surgery would open up in a pretty graphic way. Then on top of that, we started to see a lot of her autonomic nervous system. So CRPS is your central nervous system, your pain. EDS is your joints. And then your autonomic nervous system is, those things that are automatic: heart rate, blood pressure, breathing, bladder, right? All of that kind of stuff. And we started to see that begin to deteriorate as well. Her whole nervous system really started shutting down. And one of the things, and I wrote about this in the book, that Elle and I had both suspected for a long time, was that there was some sort of autoimmune component to what was going on. And there's actually kind of debate in the medical industry as to whether CRPS is considered an autoimmune disease or not. No one really knows, and I don't know if it matters, but we kind of said there has to be this autoimmune component. And it was in May of 2018, 2 months prior to her death, that we finally got test results that confirmed that yes, in fact, there were these significant neurological autoimmune antibody markers that indicated, like, yes, in fact, this is your nervous system, attacking itself. And it was incredibly validating for her. All of these years of people thinking, like, yeah, I know you're in pain, but walk it off, more or less, right? To have these results showing these markers that said unequivocally, these are antibodies that your body is producing that are attacking your nervous system. But I think for her, that knowing gave her the peace of mind to go back home, because now she knew for sure.
You had some premonitions about how Elle was going to leave. Can you share that? Are you comfortable sharing that?
The premonition piece, as I would be walking, it started with me hearing her eulogy in my head. I could hear my voice eulogizing her. And again, every time I literally, I would squish my eyes and shake my head and like a little kid does, to try and just make that thought go away. But it kind of worked backwards. It was, I could hear my voice eulogizing her, and then I could see this sanctuary full of people at her service. And I saw myself walking into her room and, finding her unresponsive and screaming and, trying to revive her and all the things that come after that. It just looped no matter how many times I would try and willingly put a different vision in my head, right? Willfully put this vision in my head of her getting better and standing up and walking, right? And I would literally try and create those scenarios in my head to replace this other one.
And then what did end up happening? It was 3 years. Mm-hmm. In May of 2018, you get this validation. And then what happened between May and July, would you say, of 2018?
Couple things. So we got this validation, and we were starting to think about what are the treatments for that. So we were looking at IVIG, which is IV immunoglobulin, which is a known treatment for many autoimmune disorders. And in the meantime, when she first got sick, she had a test for Lyme disease that came out negative. And for whatever reason, her doctor decided to retest her. And now it showed that she had an active case of Lyme, as well as the antibodies that would show a long, drawn-out case of Lyme. And that we got that diagnosis right after we got this autoimmune diagnosis. And so we were in the process of trying to get IVIG set up when we got this Lyme diagnosis, and her doctor said, Lyme messes up everything. And we have to, and so the operating hypothesis was CRPS was the CRPS. She was going to get that because that's her brain chemistry. And what we believe, and we'll never really know, is that somewhere around that time, she also contracted Lyme, and her body mounted an immune response to the Lyme, which then got out of control and created this autoimmune encephalopathy is what it's called. That was kind of our operating hypothesis, was that these things were not unrelated. They were connected, but the idea was to start to treat the Lyme with an antibiotic to get that under control, because the IVIG wouldn't do what it's intended to do unless that Lyme was starting to be under control, right? So one without the other would have been pointless. So in the meantime, she also had a port placed prior to the Lyme diagnosis, actually. And so because she had the port, we said, all right, let's start her on an IV antibiotic for the Lyme, because we have to have her on that for a month anyway before we start the IVIG. So there were all of these big medical decisions being made in this May-June timeframe, and this hope. And in July, she, for whatever reason, stopped being able to digest food. And we ended up going to the ER about 10 days before she died. And she had gastroparesis, which is not an unheard of thing. It basically means the autonomic nervous system, when you swallow food, that then causes your muscles to push it down through your digestive tract, which is a totally obviously automatic thing, stopped working for her. We spent about a week in the hospital with them experimenting with different medications, and they finally found a cocktail that seemed to be working a bit, and she was able to slowly start digesting food and pushing it down. But but the question that they couldn't answer was, well, why did this happen? It was a period of time where Elle and I really communicated without words. We were in the hospital and I knew if she was going to be on a feeding tube that she would not have the will to stay in this body. I knew that. And so they were able to get it under control temporarily. But this looming question of, why is this happening? And can you tell me that it's not going to happen again? And when it does happen again, are you going to be able to get it under control, or is she going to need a feeding tube? But those questions couldn't be answered. And so they sent us home on July 17th, 5 days before she died. We spent those 5 days in this haze of kind of waiting. So it was this blur, right, of just devastation. And the day before she died, she had texted me to come in her room in the middle of the night. And all of the lesions on her feet and on her legs that had scarred over simultaneously all opened up. And that hadn't happened before.
And what were the lesions from?
Nobody really knows. They can happen with CRPS. Again, all of these are hypotheses that doctors have, that it has something to do with like vascular constriction, but no one really knows. And they would just spontaneously appear, but never all at the same time. And she had, and you see the photos in the book of just these scars covering her feet, and every single one of those scars opened. And so her feet were just pools and pools and pools of blood. And then you have to imagine the pain, right? Imagine being burned alive and now, right, you've got these open lesions. And that was the night before. And then the next day she took her life. But so when I think about those 2 months, from this kind of hopeful understanding that it was autoimmune and that maybe there would be a path, and then this kind of rapid fire, losing the ability to digest food, and then all at once, all of these lesions opening up simultaneously, it was like, again, as I look back now, I think it was Elle's body saying, enough.
She was done. I mean, her human body was
done.
I'm just feeling for you right now. Thank you for sharing, but I want to give you like such a hug right now, because
I would take it.
She was such a brave warrior through this whole thing. And so were you. I mean, and are you. This journey you have been on is going to change the lives of so many people. When you get to the other side and you and Elle are together, you'll be like, okay,
well,
we get it now.
Actually, what Elle said to you when she left that day, and I know you include a portion of what she said in the book. Elle knew it was her time, but that she was going to be with you and will see you again. And which is also the name of the book, comes out of this message as well. What
she said was, I'm in every raven and every rainbow you see. And we'll see each other again before you know it. And she wrote, it's time for me to say goodnight. It's time for me to sleep. And good night, mommy. I love you. The final thing that she wrote, which is, I love you, mama, Elle. That was how she signed her note to me. And I know she's right. When she said, we'll see each other again before you know it. When I read it, my thinking was, when it's my time to leave this earth, right, she and I will see each other, and I've no doubt. But what I realize is, when she said we'll see each other again before you know it, she meant before you know it. Like right now. Right, like now. Yeah. Like in my head, she's saying, that's my mama. Like, and she says mama. Like, you don't have to wait however long, until it's my time. Like, we'll see each other again before you know it. Like, no.
So Vanessa, what do you think, if Elle could talk to us right now, if she was sitting down, we know she's here, but if we could audibly hear her, what do you think she would say her message was with her life?
I thought about it, and there's so much, right? There's so much to her, a message around being believed, and a message around chronic pain and medical research and sexuality and sexual identity. And I tried, I'm like, so what's the one thing? And what I realized is her one thing. I mean, there isn't one thing, but you know what I mean? Her one thing is truth. That is what she lives, present tense, for, is she was and is a seeker of truth and a speaker of truth. That's who she is. She wanted to learn everything. And she would joke that she's like, I want to know everything there is to know, right? Which is impossible. And so I think her message is around truth and the liberation that I know she feels in having found and having spoken her truth, and therefore the liberation that she wants others to feel in finding and speaking their truth. And that was honestly my big revelation in writing this book, is that she helped me understand my own truth in writing this. And there's a reason why there's the saying, the truth shall set you free. She knew that.
There's no doubt. There is no doubt that is the truth. Well, and also let's talk about what you want people to walk away after reading this.
When the publisher first read it and she asked me, she said, what do you want people to feel when they read this? And I said, I just want people to feel, just to feel something and be connected with that part of themselves.
And actually, in our conversation, we talked about why did she have to endure such pain, physical pain. You endured emotional pain. She also endured emotional pain, but she actually had this physical pain. And it's interesting to me that the word that you use is feel, that you want people to feel. That makes so much sense.
I think that's why she came in and chose to experience so many different things at this time. This story is going to give people the courage to first feel, because you don't know who you are until you look at your own pain and feel those feelings, right? And she was not given a lot of choice in some of the pain that she experienced, but look what she did with it.
Yeah.
What she did with that is so profound. And I keep saying will touch so many people because of the level of pain that she endured. I think will give people so much courage.
That's the hope.
And there's so much more to the story, which we will talk about in our next episode, which is really, and you've talked a little bit about that today. And obviously, Karen and I have also brought her in because she's with us. And obviously you, especially on a daily basis, I think that what you can help continue to teach people is how we never really die. And so I don't know if you want to just touch on that really quickly, and then we'll really dive into it with both Lisa Nitskin, who's a spiritual medium and happens to be one of our closest friends. And I know a lot of people who watch Seeking with Robyn have met Lisa before. And then you'll also meet our friend Amy, who's another one of our closest friends, who was really a catalyst and certainly pivotal in this journey as well.
Absolutely. People ask me often, how are you sitting up straight, right? How are you even functioning? And my honest answer is, Elle's the one who gets me through every day. And that's just the honest truth, because she does show up every single day to let me know that she's here and she's thriving, and that she and I can and do have a relationship that is current. And that is what gets me through every day. I'm grateful for every single blessing that Elle has given me, one of which is that her energy is so strong and so intact, and that she can show up for me every single day.
I believe you say this somewhere in the book about how she's more alive now. What was it that you said or that you thought?
The words came into my head in the fall, like maybe 3 months or so after she passed. I would be walking and it was like everything was in Technicolor. And I would walk and I would just be overwhelmed with this feeling of her vibrancy. And what the words that came into my head was that she felt more alive and more vibrant now than when she was physically here and living, because she had been trapped. I mean, her soul was always doing its work, but it had been trapped in this body that was so profoundly failing her. And free from that, there was just this vibrancy to her energy that was palpable and still is. And I feel that now.
I just wanted to also say that when you were speaking, what I also felt that Elle taught you is how to speak your own truth.
Well, and I think it's no coincidence, as we talked about at the beginning as well, that you have this foundation in psychology. You are so equipped to help change so many lives along with Elle.
Yeah. And it's so much more than a book. It's so much more. And I think this is just the beginning. And we're so grateful that you've shared the story with us so that we can share it with others. But I think it's just the very, very beginning. I can't wait to see where this story takes you.
And I look forward to continuing this conversation and really talking more about the actual signs and the actual conversations that we are having with Elle all of the time, because we can understand her. And there's really some specificity to that I think can inspire others who've lost somebody to seek out some of that conversation with someone that can help translate for them if they can't do it themselves. Although I think what you really are able to do is show people that you can do this. You can have those conversations on your own. And I know when I'm with Vanessa, it happens the entire time, no matter where we are, because in the pre-corona world, we'd be out a lot. And it was in the songs, it was in the names of the waiters, it was in anything that we're doing, it comes through. And so I really actually hope that people listening to this or who have read the book, if they would like to ask questions, we will answer some of those questions when we get together again as well.
I look forward to that, because the after and the way that she has shown up, and I hope the lessons that people can take from that around fact that people's energy stays intact. My hope is there can be so much healing in that for people.
You know, what I know Karen and I, what we set out to do from a spiritual perspective is translate, right? Like, we want to make things that feel out there. We want them to feel like that anybody can do them, that they're normal. And what you're able to do is take this really extraordinary, unimaginable story and reality for you, and you're able to make it accessible for all of us, you know, because even though I hope that I don't have to do and go through what you went through, I can understand it. And there's pieces of it, as we said, that we all can relate to. And that's what you did and what you're doing, you know?
This is huge what you've signed up for.
Yes. Yeah.
But you're living your purpose, and you are loving and honoring your daughter more than you could ever imagine by doing this. You have to know that.
Thank you. You.
So hard to do, but you're doing it, and it's going to have a major effect on this planet at a time when it needs it so much.
I love you. Thank you so much for.
To be continued.
Absolutely.
Thank you. And thank you. Yes.
Thank you, Elle.
Thank you, Elle. Thank you, Elle. Thank you, Vanessa, for being so open and so honest, and for speaking your truth and being one of my soul people. I love you so much.